first of all, before I start into Visual Studio, let me just give you a little spreadsheet here. This is showing the steps that we have to follow to get this application put together. And I just put these together. I don't know if this is complete. I may have to add some things to it. But basically what we want to do is start by creating a brand new ASP.NET solution with MVC selected as an option. So let's go ahead and do that. Come into Visual Studio and we're going to say File New, Project, and we're going to choose Visual C#, and then we'll pick Web, and then we'll select the ASP.NET web application with .NET Framework. And I'm going to put this program on my desktop, and I'll call it, well, the one I did at school was Mayberry, so let's call this one Juneberry, I don't know. Whatever. Okay. Now you want to make sure you have the .NET Framework at 4.6.1, and you don't want it to be down below that. Make sure that it's the latest version of the .NET Framework, and then you don't want to check either one of these over here. So you want to click OK. And then here we don't want authentication. So if there's anything here that says anything other than no authentication, then change it. Click the change button and make sure it says no authentication. And then select the MVC option here, which will check this checkbox, and nothing else here. So it should look just like you see it. And click OK. So what it's going to do at this point is it's going to create the project and all the folders and the various bits and pieces that are needed. And if you look down at the bottom, you'll notice how it's adding all of this stuff to the project. So it's going out to the internet and downloading all of this stuff, and it's putting it into a folder named Packages, which is going to be outside of the solution folder. And I'll show you that here in a little bit. But at this point, you can see if you look over to the right, we have all of our folders. We're missing the View Models folder, which we have to create, but we'll go ahead and do that later. So let's take a look then at our spreadsheet and see what we're going to do next here. So the next step is to use the Package Manager to add Microsoft Entity Framework to the solution. So we're going to come in here and go up to the Tools menu and then down to NuGet Package Manager. And we can do this by selecting the center menu item. And we're going to go over to Browse, and we're going to select the third item down. Now, it may not be the third item on your system, but it should be close to the top. I'll pick Entity Framework. You come over to the right, select the project, and make sure it says latest stable version. If it's not 6.2.0, if it's something higher, that's fine. But click Install to get this started. Click the Accept button, and it will start downloading the materials that you need. Now that's all we have to download from the Package Manager at this point. So let's come back to our spreadsheet. Now it says to create the entity classes, or called the POCO objects. These are going to go in the model folder, and you can see here what we're going to be building is our player and team objects, as we talked about it in class. So I'm going to go to the project, and I'm going to right click on the models folder and click the add class option, and we'll start by building the team class. So I'll type in team, and what I want to do here is create a property for the ID, which should always be capital I, lowercase d. Then I want to create a name property, and I want a sponsor. Now, I want the name to be required, so I'm going to go up and put the required annotation above that field. And I I'm not going to do that for sponsor. I'm going to let the sponsor be optional, so a team does not have to have a sponsor. But name is required. Now, ID is implicitly required because it's numeric. And that's always true when you're creating these POCOs. You don't have to make the primary key a required field. But anything else you have in here, you need to annotate this as required if you need it to be so. Okay, I'm going to go up here and remove the using statements I don't need. And then I'm going to go ahead and right-click on Models, and I'm going to add another class. This time we'll be adding the Player class. Now the Player class will be similar to the Team class, and then I'm going to have a integer ID property. Oops. And I need a string for the name of the team. A rank. And I need the team that the player is on. Notice I'm using uppercase T for team in both cases here. You can get away with this in C# and actually even in Visual Basic. And you can see by the colors that Visual Studio identifies the class and the object, even though they're named the same thing. It's usually not a very good practice, but in this particular case, it's appropriate to do that. Now, in addition to the team, because a player has a team or is on a team, I'm going to add here the foreign key field. And this is done to facilitate lazy loading so that we don't have to load the entire team object for a player. If we look up a player, we'll get the team ID without having to bring the whole team object in. And this is done because sometimes these objects that are inside of other objects can be quite large. And when you do aggregation, which is what this is, you can snowball yourself into a performance hit, a major performance hit. So lazy loading will not recursively load all of the objects that player is composed of, but it will download and link the foreign keys, which is good enough because when we want to load the team, we'll have the ID, which enables us to do it. Now in this case here, I'm going to indicate that the name is required, and I want the rank to be required, and also I want the rank to be within a range of 1 to 10. So we'll add this annotation in, which will enforce that range limitation. The last thing I want to do is put in an annotation so that when I display the team on the form in the browser, when it comes time for that, the view will display the name team as opposed to team ID. And you'll see where this fits in later when we get to that point. But for now, look at this as describing what you want the view to show in the label that's above the drop-down for selecting the team. And that's what it will do. Oh, got these mixed up here. Okay. Good. And then finally, I'm going to get rid of the unused directives up top and save. So the next step then is to go into Models and add the application DB context class. I will call this application DB context. And this particular class needs to derive from the DB context base class. Now it won't show up if you haven't brought the entity framework in, but if you have brought it in, then you'll be okay. It will show up in link. But the system.data.entity directive needs to be present for it to recognize DB context. Now inside, we're going to create a DB set. Notice the B is lowercase, not upper. And this is a DB set of team objects called teams. Likewise, I'm going to create a DB set of player objects called players. And that's all I need to do for this particular class. And that's it. Save. And I'll do a build at this point just to make sure everything's cool. And it should build successfully. Now at this point, I'm ready to build the database. So I'm going to go to the Package Manager console window. And I'm going to enable migrations, which is going to create a migrations folder with some code in it to set up a configuration. Next thing I'm going to do is add a migration, and I'm going to call this thing initial. This particular command will do scaffolding, which creates the code that, when run, will build your database, and that's what you're seeing here. To actually run that code, we call update database, and that will actually build your database for you. And you can come up to the SQL Server Object Explorer panel, and you'll notice if I go under the MS SQL Local DB server, and I go to databases, you'll see here the Juneberry Models Application DB context. If I go into that, that is what it named the database, which isn't really a very good database name. We can change that, but we're not going to worry about that here. But if I go to tables, I will see my players and my teams. So if I right-click on teams, I can view data, and I can add in some data here. So first team, okay, so we've got some teams here. Notice the IDs are automatically chosen because those are set to be identity fields, or which we would oftentimes call auto increment fields in other DBMSs. But I've got two teams. I'm going to now bring up the players class, or I'm sorry, the players table. And what I'll do here is I will create some players. We'll put a couple of people on the first team, and we'll put a person on the second one. That's good enough for now. Just some data you're putting in to see something when you bring up the website later on. That's all we're doing here. So I'll close this and this, and I'll close this, and let's see, I don't need this. So basically, we've got our database built. So we're all set now to start building the rest of our structure in the program. And if I go to my trusty spreadsheet here, I notice I put the definitions of the entity classes here, and I also have additional steps. So we will, in the next part, continue on to step 5.